Kemalism, also known as Atatürkism, or the Six Arrows, is the founding ideology of the Republic of Turkey.Kemalism, as it was implemented by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, was defined by sweeping political, social, cultural and religious reforms designed to separate the new Turkish state from its Ottoman predecessor and embrace a westernized way of living, including the establishment of democracy, secularism, state support of the sciences and free education, many of which were first introduced to Turkey during Atatürk's presidency in his reforms. Many of the root ideas of Kemalism began during the late Ottoman Empire under various reforms to avoid the imminent collapse of the empire, beginning chiefly in the early 19th century Tanzimat reforms. The mid-century Young Ottomans attempted to create the ideology of Ottoman nationalism, or Ottomanism, to quell the rising ethnic nationalism in the empire and introduce limited democracy for the first time while maintaining Islamist influences. In the early 20th century, Young Turks abandoned Ottoman nationalism in favor of early Turkish nationalism, while adopting a secular political outlook. After the demise of the Ottoman Empire, Atatürk, influenced by both the Young Ottomans and the Young Turks, as well as by the successes and failures, led the declaration of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, borrowing from the earlier movement's ideas of secularism and Turkish nationalism, while bringing about, for the first time, free education, and other reforms that have been enshrined by later leaders into guidelines for government of Turkey. Philosophy. Kemalism is a modernization philosophy which guided the transition between multi-religious, multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire to the secular, unitary Republic of Turkey. Kemalism sets the boundaries of the social process in the Turkish Reformation. Atatürk is the founder of Kemalism, and his doctrine was implemented as state ideology even after his death. Fundamentals. There are 6 fundamental pillars of the ideology: republicanism, populism, nationalism, secularism, statism, and reformism. The principles came to be recognized as unchangeable and sacrosanct. Republicanism in the Kemalist framework replaced the absolute monarchy of the Ottoman dynasty with the rule of law, popular sovereignty and civic virtue, including an emphasis on liberty practiced by citizens. Kemalist republicanism defines a type of constitutional republic, in which representatives of the people are elected, and must govern in accordance with existing constitutional law limiting governmental power over citizens. The head of state and other officials are chosen by election rather than inheriting the positions, and the decisions are subject to judicial review. In defending the change from the Ottoman state, Kemalism asserts that all laws of the Republic of Turkey should be inspired by actual needs here on earth as a basic tenet of national life. Kemalism advocates a republican system as the best representative of the wishes of the people. Among the many types of republic, the Kemalist republic is a representative democracy with a parliament chosen in general elections, a president as head of state elected by parliament and serving for a limited term, a prime minister appointed by the president, and other ministers appointed by parliament. The Kemalist president does not have direct executive powers, but has limited veto powers, and the right to contest with referendum. The day-to-day operation of government is the responsibility of the Council of Ministers formed by the Prime Minister and the other ministers. There is a separation of powers between the executive, the legislative and the judiciary, in which no one branch of government has authority over another, although Parliament is charged with the supervision of the Council of Ministers, which which can be compelled to resign by a vote of no confidence. The Kemalist Republic is a unitary state in which three organs of state govern the nation as a single unit, with one constitutionally created legislature. On some issues, the political power of government is transferred to lower levels, to local elected assemblies represented by mayors, but the central government retains the principal governing role. Populism is defined as a social revolution aimed to transfer the political power to citizenship. Kemalist populism differs from the Western understanding of the term populism. In Western European culture, the construct populism is a political doctrine where one sides with the people against the elites. In the Ottoman society, the people side to autocracy, theocracy and feudalism. Kemalism moved the orientation of political power towards the best interest of the general public. Kemalist populism is an extension of the Kemalist modernization movement. In Kemalist populism, in the ideal society, individuals would be able to read religious texts by themselves or have them freely translated. The literacy drive and translation of the Quran to Turkish, for instance, both occurred very early in Atatürk's Reformation. Atatürk stated on a number of occasions that the legitimate rulers of Turkey were common citizens, such as villagers and workers. Sovereignty. Kemalist social content does not accept any adjectives placed before the definition of a nation, denies the types of national unity based on racial, religious, totalitarian and fascist ideologies. It strongly opposes any kind of authority, oppression, colonialism, imperialism, etc., against the sovereignty of the people. Sovereignty must belong solely to people without any term, condition, etc. Sovereignty belongs to the people, nation unrestrictedly and unconditionally. Motto: Kemalist social content was brought against the political domination of sheikhs, tribal leaders, and Islamism of the Ottoman Empire. Initially, the declaration of the Republic was perceived as returning to the days of the first caliphs. However, Kemalist nationalism aimed to shift the political legitimacy from autocracy, theocracy, and feudalism to the active participation of its citizenry, the Turks. Kemalist social content wanted to establish the value of Turkish citizenship. A sense of pride associated with this citizenship would give the needed psychological spur for people to work harder and achieve a sense of unity and national identity. Active participation, or the will of the people, was established with the Republican regime, and Turkish is replacing the other forms of affiliations that were promoted in the Ottoman Empire. The shift in affiliation was symbolized with Turkish Nimatu Turkum.Den. The motto Nimatu Turkum.Den was promoted against the Long Live the Sultan, Long Live the Sheikh, or Long Live the Caliph. Laius Ism. The Laius Ism of Kemalist ideology aims to banish religious interference in government affairs, and vice versa. It differs from the passive Anglo-American concept of secularism, but is similar to the concept of laïcité in France. The roots of Kemalist secularism lie in the reform efforts in the late Ottoman Empire, especially the Tanzimat period and the later Second Constitutional Era. The Ottoman Empire was an Islamic state in which the head of the Ottoman state held the position of the caliph. The social system was organized according to various systems, including the religiously organized millet system and Sharia law, allowing religious ideology to be incorporated into the Ottoman administrative, economic, and political system. This way of life is today defined as Islamism, the belief that Islam should guide social and political as well as personal life. In the Second Constitutional Era, the Ottoman Parliament pursued largely secular policies, although techniques of religious populism and attacks on other candidates' piety still occurred between Ottoman political parties during elections. These policies were stated as the reason for the counter-coup of 1909 by Islamist nationalists and absolute monarchists. The secular policies of the Ottoman Parliament also factored in the Arab Revolt during World War I, when secularism was implemented in the fledgling Turkish state. It was initiated by the abolition of the centuries-old Caliphate in March 1924. The office of Sheikh al-Islam was replaced with the presidency of religious affairs. In 1926, the Mejel and Sharia law codes were abandoned in favor of an adapted Swiss civil code and a penal code modeled on the German and Italian codes. Other religious practices were done away with, including the dissolution of Sufi orders and the penalization of wearing a fez, which was viewed by Atatürk as a tie to the Ottoman past. State and religion. Atatürk was profoundly influenced by the triumph of laicite in France. Atatürk perceived the French model as the authentic form of secularism. Kemalism strove to control religion and transform it into a private affair rather than an institution interfering with politics, scientific and social progress, sane reason, and the liberty of fellow man. As Atatürk once put it, it is more than merely creating a separation between state and religion. Atatürk has been described as working as if he were Leo the Isaurian, Martin Luther, the Baron d'Holbach, Ludwig Buchner, Emil Coombs, and Jules Ferry rolled into one in creating Kemalist secularism. Kemalist secularism does not imply nor advocate agnosticism and nihilism. It means freedom of thought and independence of the institutions of the state from the dominance of religious thought and religious institutions. The Kemalist principle of Laius Ism is not against moderate and apolitical religion, but against religious forces opposed to and fighting modernization and democracy. According to the Kemalist perception, the Turkish state is to stand at an equal distance from every religion, neither promoting nor condemning any set of religious beliefs. Kemalism has an active neutrality stance towards religion, very similar to secularism in France, and calls for actions related to religion to be carefully analyzed and evaluated by the government through the Presidency of Religious Affairs, which is responsible for managing the religious affairs and institutions in the country. The Presidency of Religious Affairs pursues the responsibility for planning, coordinating, and implementing the balance, approving mosque sermons by imams and procedures for other religious rituals. Kemalism has to balance the space between different religious sects. Religious education, which was originally left to private initiative with after-school courses until 1980, when it was brought to secondary education with a formal curriculum covering religious doctrines. This change of politics to balance religious doctrine is debated. There are three main ideological perspectives in this debate. The first one views this change as a breach of Kemalist secularist ideology, and demands a return to the previous policy. The second perspective accepts the religious education but objects to its compulsory position. The third position accepts the compulsory position except those responsible for minority communities who wish to have their own religious courses, within the boundaries of the regulations administered by the Ministry of Education, Politics and Religion. The Kemalist form of separation of state and religion sought the reform of a complete set of institutions, interest groups, the relationships between those institutions, and the political norms and rules that governed the functions. The biggest change in this perspective was the abolishment of the Ottoman Caliphate on March 3, 1924, followed by the removal of its political mechanisms. The article stating that the established religion of Turkey is Islam was removed from the constitution on February 5, 1937. From a political perspective, Kemalism is anti-clerical in that it seeks to prevent religious influence on the democratic process, which was a problem even in the largely secular politics of the second constitutional era of the Ottoman Empire, when even non-religiously affiliated political parties like the Committee Party of Union and Progress and the Freedom and Accord Party feuded over matters such as the Islamic piety of the candidates in the Ottoman elections of 1912. Thus, in the Kemalist political perspective, politicians cannot claim to be the protector of any religion or religious sect, and such claims constitute sufficient legal grounds for the permanent banning of political parties. Insignia. The Ottoman social system was based on religious affiliation. Religious insignia extended to every social function. Clothing identified citizens with their own particular religious grouping. Headgear distinguished rank and profession. Turbans, fezzes, bonnets, and headdresses denoted the sex, rank, and profession, both civil and military, of the wearer. Religious insignia outside of worship areas was banned. While Atatürk considered women's religious coverings as antithetical to progress and equality, he also recognized that headscarves were not such a danger to the separation of church and state to warrant an outright ban. But the constitution was amended in 1982, following the 1980 coup by the Kemalist-leaning military, to prohibit women's use of Islamic coverings such as headscarves at higher education institutions. Mustafa Kemal, a member of the European Parliament and chair of the Joint Parliamentary Committee with Turkey, has publicly criticized these clothing restrictions for Muslim women, whereas the European Court of Human Rights ruled in numerous cases that such restrictions in public buildings and educational institutions do not constitute a violation of human rights. Reformism, or revolutionism is a principle which calls for the country to replace the traditional institutions and concepts with modern institutions and concepts. This principle advocated the need for fundamental social change through revolution as a strategy to achieve a modern society. The core of the revolution, in the Kemalist sense, was an accomplished fact. In a Kemalist sense, there is no possibility of return to the old systems because they were deemed backward. The principle of revolutionism went beyond the recognition of the reforms made during Atatürk's lifetime. Atatürk's revolutions in the social and political life are accepted as irreversible. Atatürk never entertained the possibility of a pause, a transition phase during the course of the progressive unfolding or implementation of the revolution. The current understanding of this concept can be described that active modification, Turkey and its society, taking over institutions from Western Europe, must add Turkish traits and patterns to them and adapt them to the Turkish culture. According to Kemalism, the making of the Turkish traits and patterns of these reforms takes generations of cultural and social experience. Nationalism. The Kemalist revolution aimed to create a nation-state from the remnants of the multi-religious and multi-ethnic Ottoman Empire. Kemalist nationalism originates from the social contract theories, especially from the principles advocated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his social contract. The Kemalist perception of social contract was affected by the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, which was perceived as a product of failure of the Ottoman millet system and the ineffective Ottomanism. Kemalist nationalism, after experiencing the Ottoman Empire's breakdown into pieces, defined the social contract as its highest ideal. In the administration and defense of the Turkish nation, national unity, national awareness and national culture are the highest ideals that we fix our eyes upon. Kemalist ideology defines the Turkish nation as a nation of Turkish people who always love and seek to exalt the family, country and nation, who know their duties and responsibilities towards the democratic, secular and social state governed by the rule of law, founded on human rights, and on the tenets laid down in the preamble to the Constitution of the Republic of Turkey. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk defines the Turkish nation by saying, "The folk which constitutes the Republic of Turkey is called the Turkish nation." Criteria. Kemalist criteria for national identity nationality or simply being Turkish refers to a shared language, and/or shared values defined as a common history, and the will to share a future. Kemalist ideology defines the Turkish people as those who protect and promote the moral, spiritual, cultural and humanistic values of the Turkish nation. Membership is usually gained through birth within the borders of the state and also the principle of jus sanguinis. Kemalist form of nationality is integrated to the Article 66 of the Constitution of the Republic of Turkey. Every citizen is recognized as a Turk, regardless of ethnicity, belief, and gender, etc. Turkish nationality law states that he or she can be deprived of his/her nationality only through an act of treason. In 2005, the Article 301 of the Turkish Penal Code made it a crime to insult Turkishness, but under pressure of the EU, this was changed in 2008 to protect the Turkish nation instead of Turkish ethnicity in 2008. An imagined nationhood of people living within the national pact borders. Extent. Kemalist nationalism believes in the principle that the Turkish state is an indivisible whole comprising its territory and people, which is defined as the unity of the state. It is a concept of nationalism which respects the right to independence of all other nations. Pan-Turkism. Kemalism had not only displaced Pan-Turkism as the official state ideology, it also focused on the nation-state's narrower interests, renouncing the concern for the outside Turks. Pan-Turkism was an ethnocentric ideology while Kemalism is polycentric in character. Kemalism wants to have an equal footing among the mainstream world civilizations. Pan-Turkists have consistently emphasized the special attributes of the Turkish peoples and wanted to unite all of the Turkish peoples. Kemalism wants an equal footing and does not aim to unite the people of Turkey with all the other Turkish nations. Most Kemalists were not interested in Pan-Turkism and from 1923 to 1950 reacted with particular firmness. Turanism. Kemalism had not only displaced Turanism as the official state ideology, it also focused on the Turkish people, within the alive and historical cultures and peoples of Anatolia. Turanism centered the nation as the union of all Turanian peoples stretching from the Altai Mountains in eastern Asia to the Bosphorus. Kemalism had a narrower definition of language which wanted to remove the Persian, Arabic, Greek, Latin, etc. words from the language used in Anatolia. Turanian leaders, such as Enver Pasha, wanted an evolving language common to all Turanian peoples, minimizing differences and maximizing similarities between them. Expansionism. Regarding expansionism, Kemalist nationalism opposes imperialism and aims to promote peace in both the domestic and the international arenas. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk wrote in 1930, "Within the political and social unity of today's Turkish nation, there are citizens and co-nationals who have been incited to think of themselves as Kurds, Circassians, Lazar Bosnians. But these erroneous appellations, the product of past periods of tyranny, have brought nothing but sorrow to individual members of the nation, with the exception of a few brainless reactionaries who became the enemy's instruments. This is because these individual members of the nation share with the generality of Turkish society the same past, history, concept of morals and laws." Statism. Kemal Atatürk made clear in his statements and policies that Turkey's complete modernization was very much dependent on economic and technological development. The principle of Kemalist statism is generally interpreted to mean that the state was to regulate the country's general economic activities and the state was to engage in areas where private enterprise was not willing to do so. or where private enterprise had proven to be inadequate, or if national interest required it. In the application of the principle of statism, however, the state emerged not only as the principal source of economic activity, but also as the owner of the major industries of the country. Great Economic Depression of 1929 has a significant role creation of this policy. Analysis. Kemalism and Turkey's political parties. The Republican People's Party was established by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk on September 9, 1923, not long before the declaration of the Republic of Turkey on October 29. The party uses the ideology to symbolize itself. Kemalism and Turkey's constitutional law. The six principles were solidified on 5 February 1937, 14 years after establishment of the Republic of Turkey. In the 1924 constitutional law, Article 2, Clause 1, Turkey is republican, nationalist, attached to the people, interventionist, secular, and revolutionary. Both the military coup of 1960 and the military coup of 1980 were followed by fundamental revisions of the Turkish constitution. The texts of the new constitutions was approved by popular referendum in each case. In the 1961 constitutional law, Article 1, Clause 1 states the Turkish state is a republic. Article 2, Clause 1, the Turkish Republic is a nationalistic, democratic, secular and social state, governed by the rule of law, based on human rights and fundamental tenets set forth in the preamble. Quote, in the 1982 constitutional law, Article 1, Clause 1 states the Turkish state is a republic. Article 2, Clause 1, the Republic of Turkey is a democratic, secular and social state governed by the rule of law, bearing in mind the concepts of public peace, national solidarity and justice, respecting human rights, loyal to the nationalism of Atatürk, and based on the fundamental tenets set forth in the preamble. Only the principles of secularism and nationalism and democracy were maintained in each change to the constitution. The 1961 constitution more strongly emphasized human rights, the rule of law, and the welfare state than the original 1924 constitution, while the 1982 constitution focused on the peace of the community and national solidarity, but also explicitly referenced some of Atatürk's principles and included them as well.